Hey, everybody out there that joined us, thanks for making the time to see us today. I'm Jim Grooney, Chief Operating Officer at Workshops for Warriors. I'd like to welcome everyone to our first fireside chat. And we're incredibly fortunate to have with us today Jeff Immelt, who served as CEO of General Electric for 16 years. His new book, Hot Seat, sheds light on his many insightful experiences while at GE. It really offers some great lessons for those called upon to lead during periods of crisis. Welcome, Jeff.
Jim, thanks.
Moderating our event today is the founder and CEO of Workshops for Warriors, Hernán Prado. Hernán's a Navy veteran, although we kind of consider him Navy plus since he served in the Marine Corps as a corpsman for several years. He also served as a surface warfare officer before dedicating himself to his current mission, training veterans to rebuild American manufacturing. Now, before we get started, a couple of quick admin notes. As time permits, there'll be a question and answer session after the discussion. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit questions. I'll read those and then I'll choose from the list when we have time, and we'll ask those questions to both Jeff and Hernán. They'll answer as many as they can before time expires. You can also use the chat button to send messages to other participants during the course of the event or to send us your contact information. Now, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Hernán.
Thank you very much for listening and coming here today. And Jeff, thanks again for joining us. I can't thank you enough. GE's always been the backbone of America and one of the world's most recognizable companies. And for those of you that are not familiar with Workshops for Warriors, what we do, we're at wfw.org, and Workshops for Warriors is the only accredited school in the nation that does training, certification, and placement for veterans and transitioning service members into advanced manufacturing careers throughout America. So we're very excited to have Jeff with us today because you may or may not know that America's got 2.4 million unfilled jobs due to lack of skilled labor and 522,000 open positions right now, and that number is scheduled to grow. So I'm very concerned about it as an American, a former naval officer, and I'm sure that Jeff sees it as well from a national perspective, and that's why I would like his help and his viewpoint on what we can do to help rebuild our nation with veterans, while continuing the other things that President Biden is trying to do as well, which is increase training, getting community colleges and vocational schools to provide the talent that we need. But it's going to require all Americans united to make this bigger effort. So, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
Please.
No, it's great to be with you. It's great, great organization. When I was at GE, we had about 15,000 veterans that worked for the company. So they were the backbone and really almost every part of the company. So it's great to be with you today.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think you started an initiative within GE to hire 5,000 veterans, and you blew that out of the water. And
yep.
So why did you decide on veterans, first of all?
Look, I mean, I think we're always in the market for talent. As a company, we range from manufacturing jobs to service jobs around the world. I think we wanted people that know how to work on teams, people that know how to handle pressure, people that want to learn and want to advance themselves. And I think veterans just align very much with those missions and values. So I always viewed it as a great talent pool. The military does its own form of training that's quite valuable. So I always looked upon that to be a feeder for the company. I'd say beyond that age, we had our training institute was really about a 20-minute drive from West Point. Sorry, Army, but we always
make mistakes.
We always relied heavily and had a great interface with West Point in terms of how to teach leadership. And so just in a number of different ways, we've just had a good association over the years.
One of the things that I was thinking constantly when I was reading your book is Theodore Roosevelt's quote, right? It's not the critic who counts. The man battled in the arena. And I kept thinking about that over and over again, and how easy it is to critique the person that's making those decisions without understanding the stresses they are under, the lack of information that they have, the corporate inertia that they're in the midst of, the financial oversight and regulation. So it's not an easy job anywhere. And you had a very, very tough time and a terrible time. I think people say that COVID is similar to it, but I don't think it's anywhere close. Like you mentioned in your book, there were just so many things that were so new to us, and you handled a lot of them with aplomb. I wanted to ask you, if you and I were both dead today, and we're looking down at this conversation as disembodied souls with no egos, with no agenda, and our goal is to kind of objectively, neutrally, and dispassionately look at what happened so that it can be a cautionary tale for the people that are now leading our nation. What would you tell the leaders of our nation, both in a political sense and business sense, about the need for training, the need for investing in the future, so that America can once again regain her title, if you want, as a global superpower, not only in manufacturing, but as an environmentally responsible and sustainable manufacturing superpower? What would you do to tell them to galvanize them into action?
So I would say, first of all, it's just the importance of people. I think no matter what field you're in, the caliber, the commitment, the perseverance, the teamwork of the people around you is paramount. No matter what kind of bad cycle I was in, when I was around people I trusted, things worked out great. And when I wasn't around people that I trusted, I made mistakes. So people are incredibly important. And as such, the way that you nurture them and train them and prepare them and coach them is absolutely critical. I think, H, the ability to look forward and not backward. People get captivated by the past, but what happens next is more important than what happened last. And sometimes leaders take great, I'd say, take great comfort in blaming the past, but life gets, made really moving forward. So I would say the ability to look into the future, to invest boldly, and to take accountability for what happens in the future. And the last thing I'd say, in the era we live in, is that progress is more important than perfection. Look, if you want to be perfect, find something else to do. But if you want to make progress step by step, to persevere, that's really what's critically important. I'm an avid reader, H, and I read a lot of military history, and I always found it to be analogous to kind of the business world. And that's because, it's the armies, or it's the people that persevered, that dealt with their own mistakes, that kept pushing forward. They ultimately were successful. And people that quit or wanted to blame other people, they fell back. So that's what I would say. Progress, look forward, nurture people. I think those three things are critical at this moment in time for our country.
It's funny. In your book, you say that you're looking to the military for training and advice and thought process. And on my end, I had no background whatsoever going into business or starting a school, but I was really fortunate to have I think the world's best leadership school, right? The Department of Defense, that helped me in a couple of different things. And I was thinking while you were saying that when you're running the obstacle course in the Marine Corps, you have these 18 guys and gals that are going through this obstacle course, and they quickly realize that if you're trying to get the best time as a team, you have one or two people that literally stand so everyone else can jump on their backs to sprint over these obstacles. And nobody wants to be that guy on the ground, but everyone else benefits. And you spend over $1 billion a year training your executives, and you said your executives spend over a year in training over like a 12-year period. That takes a huge amount of commitment and resolve, especially when you're a publicly held company, to weather that constant onslaught of, hey, get rid of training, you'll be more profitable. How did you manage to tell people to back off while you continue to focus on that investment in your future?
It's a great question. I think the aspect that I would have is the need to think long term. And when you think long term, you know that there's always going to be different ways to spend money or different ways to cut costs. But over the long term, it's the best trained people that make the most difference, right? That really create the best businesses, the best products, the best customer satisfaction. During my time at GE, our aviation business was probably the most successful business. It made the jet engines for Boeing and Airbus, but it also made engines for Black Hawk helicopters and the F-15. And so we had a real interface with the military. And H, these people were they were craftsmen, they were trained, they were perfectionists, they were engineers, they were salespeople. And they had to think not just a quarter ahead, but they had to think a year, 2 years, a decade ahead. And so those, in my experience, at least in my background, those were the best businesses that basically, knew we had to be accountable for short-term results, but where people never compromised on long-term for short-term. And I think that's really important. It's important in the military and it's important in business.
Yep. That's another takeaway that I took from your book was, as a business leader, you were thinking of 5, 10 years and on a quarterly basis. And now that you're retired, and you don't have to deal with all these people always striving, demanding your attention and immediate results. Now that you're retired and you have a little presence of mind and you have the wherewithal, how do you share this plan for the future with American elected officials that have 2, 4, or 6-year terms, when as a nation, I think that we need to think a lot longer. Election cycles make people think for that election cycle. I think that there's a great opportunity for American business leaders and retired business leaders to kind of help the American political leaders think longer term than their term in office so that we can rebuild our nation. I'm concerned that as an American born overseas, how do we get America to rekindle the thing that I think is most powerful about being an American, which is vision? I think that over the last 40 to 50 years, we've kind of suffered from a staggering lack of vision and lack of leadership. And we have stopped dreaming big because we're so scared to fail. And you write in your book that if you want to be creative, you've got to accept some type of risk. How do you get people that have been so risk averse to recognize that if they are not creative, they're going to get overrun?
So I think, H, in my career, I was trying to bring a legacy company forward in the future. And sometimes I was too far ahead and sometimes maybe I was too slow, but it was hard to get it right. Where I am today is in kind of the startup world. So I get a chance to see disruptors. I get a chance to see people that are going to shake up the system going forward in the future. And that's fun, right? It's another way to give back, is to create new companies. But when I look at the country that you and I love, we've got to get into the problem solving business again. And that's more than one election cycle. That's more than one governor or president can do. It's got to get some momentum. I think the first thing we have to do is we've got to get, this kind of COVID crisis stabilized and behind us. But then when you think about, clean energy or affordable healthcare, I could go down a list of 4 or 5 things. And if we just focused on these 4 or 5 things and put all the best minds, made people accountable, really worked hard in the public and private setting, we would develop a sense of pride that comes with, getting things done, right? And the way that, let's say, Eisenhower put the highway system into the country and things like that happened in the past. So I think that's what our destiny has to be. It's got to be about a problem-solving generation that's coming up, and a government that helps facilitate it and helps us solve it. Because some of these problems are so big, we can't turn our back on them anymore, and they're going to take years and decades to resolve. It's got to be public sector, it's got to be private sector, but it has to happen now. So I just think the next generation of business people, the next generation of leaders, have to be about solving problems.
I agree it's solving problems and with a longer mindset, and at the risk of getting political, I'm very concerned, again, as a foreign-born American, that we are among the few people that are playing this game fairly. So again, I grew up in France, born in Argentina, and I'm here, enlisted in the US Navy. And one of the things that I took away is that we're literally the only kids on the block that are playing this game fairly and other people are not, and we continue to play the same game, hoping to get different results. We are very mindful of the fact that, or at least I am, that every manufacturing superpower has been the most relevant nation of its kind. And every civilization that we understand and read in history books is because they have been the manufacturing superpower of their kind. If we abdicate that title, we are abdicating our relevance. And other nations are subsidizing vocational training, educational pathways for people that are going through training programs, vacations, you name it, to enable that young man or woman to be able to go through a training program that's required by their nation and that nation's industry to become relevant and competent. In America, we do not do that. We used to rely on the Department of Defense to provide that type of vocational training and expertise. And we'd have the Department of Defense just basically create this huge pool of people that were ethically grounded, mission driven, and showed up on time. The military would put them through all sorts of technical training, give them 5, 10, 20, 30 years of on-the-job experience. And then American corporate entities would just absorb these people into their industry and companies would flourish. We don't have that anymore. How do we get America to realize that without that base, without that nationally viable training pipeline, we're not going to get to the next level, and we will be falling behind to the point where we will not be able to catch up.
Yeah, I'd make a couple comments, H,
Please.
you know, on your topic. The first one I'd say is the most sophisticated products that are going to be relevant for the 21st century. And by now, I'm not talking about just software. I'm talking about physical products as well, are the intersection of really engineering, design, and manufacturing, right? So if you think about electric vehicles, think about wind turbines, think about jet engines, think about sophisticated healthcare equipment. It's the combination of design and manufacturing. So if you want to compete industrially in the 21st century, you can't give up on manufacturing. That's indigenous to your competitive advantage, point number one, right? Point number two, look, I'm a global guy. I've kind of lived around the world. I've worked around the world. I've grown up in a world where companies had to compete and win on a global basis. It's clear that not everybody plays by the same rules, but it doesn't mean we can't afford to engage, right? I always viewed H as a sign of my success, the ability to sell American-made products in China. In other words, I didn't want our team to be afraid. I wanted them to be confident that we could make something in Cincinnati and we could sell it in Germany or China or India or any place in the world. And I hope we look at this, you know, we come at the world with a little bit of a you know, determination and our jaw out saying, yeah, we want fair trade and we're going to insist on fair trade. But man, if you play against us, we're going to fight, we're going to compete, and we're going to win. So supply chain's important, being competitive is important. And then the last thing I would say, you know, H, is we've got to win the new industries that count. Now, historically, I would say the Department of Defense helped us define what the next industries are going to be. I still think it's important that the DoD plays that role, but some of the industries are right in front of us. It's battery technology, it's electric vehicles, it's sophisticated healthcare products. I mean, I could go down the list, and those are products that we've got to be, you know, think about as a country, think about ways to compete and to win. And this is a combination of technology and manufacturing. In terms of manufacturing, go ahead. I'm sorry, H, go ahead.
No, I agree with you on that. But part of that is the basis of, for example, Department of Defense spun up a huge amount of technologies that we now enjoy every day.
Yep.
The Department of Defense also subsidized our nation's shipyards,
Yep.
which is, again, the backbone of our nation, because, you know, when we go to war again and shipping lanes get cut, that's when you start seeing kind of the impact of the amount of traffic that goes on sea lines. Well, you have the rest of the world that is basically benefiting from American intellectual property. And I'm going to put a shameless plug into our attorneys, Fish and Richardson, if you're out there, right? Workshops for Warriors has almost 40 patents and trademarks as a result. But we don't ever protect our patents or our IP in China because it's not cost effective. and it's not really that useful. But the Chinese and others are leveraging decades and trillions of dollars of work, and they are literally enjoying the fruits of our labors, refining them and trying to sell them back to us again. If we don't do something about that, then it's an incredibly lopsided world.
Look, trade is complicated and intellectual property needs to be protected for sure. But I always try to look at the other side of this, H, to say, here's an economy that's as big as the US and growing faster.
Right.
Do we really want to raise a generation of Americans who feel like they can't compete there, who feel like that's off the grid? Now, we've got to make it fair.
Right.
President Biden has to take on some of the same initiatives that President Trump did. But I think about a world that I live in, H, which was the, let's say, commercial aviation market, where GE dominated in China. The Chinese commercial air forces or airlines are going to be bigger than the US probably by 2030, right?
Mm-hmm.
We want to participate in that growth. So I think we need to take a harder line on intellectual property for sure.
Mm-hmm. But
we also need to figure out ways to win around the world, because the US market, we're 5% of the world's population, we're 25% of the world's GDP. The only way we sustain the quality of life that we have right now is we've got to be adventurous and we got to be winning every place around the world. Now, let me come back to manufacturing, H.
Right.
I think that many products that get made outside the United States and imported back to the United States could be made here now, based on new tools of automation, based on new tools like additive manufacturing, superior workforce. So I personally think there's going to be lots of opportunities as we look at the future in terms of ways to continue to rejuvenate the manufacturing base of the US.
In 2012, you brought GE refrigerators back.
Yep.
And you started manufacturing them in the United States. And you said in your book, and I had highlighted, that you had allowed and you recognized that you started letting so many things go out that you had lost control of your source, that you had lost control of your vendor pool. And then as a result, you no longer could control your costs.
Yep.
And you were thinking about costs. So I'm thinking about American resiliency and American sovereignty. And not as an America first guy. I'm saying America is the number one country that you think of when there's a calamity overseas. American ships respond. When there's a national disaster, the Mercy or the Comfort or another US Navy ship goes out there to help that nation. That's the number one nation that you think of when it comes to helping the other people in the world, because we are doing it from a position of power. And I'm concerned that if we do not do something similar to what we do for subsidizing shipyards, so that we bring back microchip production, programmable logic controllers, medical manufacturing, forging, casting, right? And we can do so in an environmentally responsible and sustainable way. But those are the core industries that if we don't have that, then we are allowing other nations to have the keys to our house, and we need to claim them back, I think. How do we bring those industries back?
Again, I think that some of it has to happen in the private sector. In this case, I mean, refrigerators aren't a sophisticated product, but in 2012, we had basically moved a lot of the manufacturing in the early 90s to Mexico. And we were having a big quality problem in 2011. And I said to the team, hey team, let's just go look and see, are we really saving money, with all this? I mean, does it really make sense? And really, what I saw was kind of jaw-dropping, which was, the fact was that maybe we did in the early days, but our US workforce was productive, the distribution costs were less, the quality costs were lower. There were just a lot of reasons to be, in that business, number one. Number two, look, I mean, an American company, even a company that wants to win around the world, I think we have to realize today that we have to be doing our part to develop the workforce in the country that's our home, right? And so any CEO that doesn't understand that that's part of the game has to be more responsible and think about it. I'm not saying, you never can have jobs overseas, but you need to understand the balance with which you work. And then strategic industries, look, I mean, you know, some of these are industries I'm not as familiar with, but look, I think when it comes to semiconductors, when it comes to some of the other technologies, we just have to be thoughtful as a country as to whether or not we can really make all of those chips outside the US and still be dependent on those products in terms of how they're sold and how they're made and where they go. The last thing I would say, H, and again, you know, having lived through periods of globalization and periods of nationalization, any company that I'm talking about pre-COVID, I'm talking about just in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, any company that had a product that was sole sourced in China for sales back to the US had to have their head examined. Really, you know, that is high risk. The boardroom should be right, you know, should be ripe with discussion, because if you couldn't see the writing on the wall, even before COVID happened, you weren't watching what was going on in the world. So now you, H, and the people you train, if they go to work for exporters, they're going to make more money per hour than if they go to work for just domestic only companies. So the best manufacturing jobs in this country are export jobs. And so we can't give up on our ability to sell things everywhere in the world. And that's what I hope we don't lose that desire.
So I completely agree with you. I think we have been given a gift that COVID has made us recognize the importance of manufacturing for our nation. It's made us realize that we have basically been hollowing out our manufacturing capability for decades. And this has shown a spotlight on that. To fix that, I think it's going to require all Americans to get together with like that triad. Just like when you sold GE Capital, you wanted to get Warren Buffett on board, right? You needed to have that anchor donor or anchor investor. You needed to have that one champion in the room. I think America needs to have a champion in the room for that. If again, I'm concerned about this silver tsunami, right? With the median age of manufacturing workers being 57 years old a couple years ago.
You're looking at my hair right now, H, is
well,
that?
Well, at least you have it, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
You have so many people that are leaving the workforce, and these are seasoned professionals that have a tremendous amount of experience, and they're not able to put the distillation of their knowledge into the newer generation that's coming up to take their place. In fact, one of our donors said that she came to our school because her COO told her that of the 1,500 employees that they had, almost 80% of them would be retiring in the next 3 years, and the other 20% had been there less than 3 years.
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
So,
I think that's right. You know, I think the you know, a couple comments I'd make. So again, you made the comment earlier, which was how much the military industrial complex had been the cornerstone of lots of technology of the previous, let's say, 50 years. I think there's going to be some new initiatives that are, you know, around infrastructure or clean technology that are going to get big investment dollars over the next decade or so. And President Biden, you know, has kind of made, you know, drawn a line in the sand that he wants this to be made in America. And, you know, 10 or 15 years ago, I would have argued with that, but now I get it, right? I see where we are and I see what we have to do. So that's point number one. Point number two, the new manufacturing jobs that you're training people to do are kind of like digital on one hand and physical on the other. I mean, additive manufacturing, I could go down the list. And so we need the next generation of workers who are going to be able to, I'd say, be more productive than the people that they were replacing, but also leveraging new technology. And this is going to have a vast opportunity, you know, for the people that are part of your training programs. They're going to have to be a different skill set. You know, the last thing, like if you take a town like San Diego, there should be, you know, big and small companies and community colleges, and you should all be part of a training pool. Because really training is one of those things that lifts all boats, right? It's not that, you know, you want to have good workers at Boeing and bad workers at General Dynamics or Northrop Grumman. Right. You want to have good workers everywhere. And so I think this is the classic case of public-private partnerships that's really going to be critical for the 21st century around training.
I agree. And to that end, right, there are a couple of things. We like to think that Workshops for Warriors kind of leapfrogs several evolutionary steps in manufacturing training. Like before, back in the day, you'd have 8,000 to 10,000 hour apprenticeship programs, and you'd train a guy or gal to be a grinder or a turn or a mill operator. And what we're teaching is people that can synthesize and master computer-aided design, computer-aided manufacturing, robotics, computer numerically controlled milling or turning or laser, water jetting. And they go what we call art to part. You give them an idea and they'll create the art, and then they'll make the part and confirm that's what you wanted to make. This leapfrogging of manufacturing takes a lot of money because you need to have very expensive equipment, and more importantly, very competent instructors to train them.
Yeah.
These are instructors that are incredibly sought after. In GE, you had the golden goose, right? That was laying the golden eggs, and everybody wanted it.
Yeah.
So how do you create, if you think about it, 2.4 million unfilled jobs, that's over a 10-year period. If you're trying to fill that chasm in 10 years, that's over 889 schools that need to be created.
Yep.
With 5 instructors per school just to train those people.
Yep.
So I'd say the number one thing that we don't even realize yet is America has no way of training those instructors yet other than Workshops for Warriors. So
Look, you and I talked about this before. I think you've got to surf some big waves. Number one, I agree with your mission completely. You've got to find a way to surf some big waves like electric vehicles, solar panel installation, additive manufacturing, get the companies involved with some of those big opportunities that are going to be seismic. They have to create a bigger funnel for you to get more students through the school and into the workforce. Just because I think if we wait for the government to do it all, it's just going to be too slow. And there's companies that just have big needs. I mean, GM and Tesla and Ford, they've all said they're going to convert to all electric vehicles by 2035. That is a huge task, right? And if they're going to make all those in the United States, that's a new design. It's a new kind of manufacturing, so I think some of these areas are going to be ones where you can really develop the backlog of talent that these companies really need.
The talent's not the issue, it's the funding of it, right? Yeah. So Mr. Cheney used to say, vision without funding is hallucination. And we have what we call the double funnel here, where you have 1 million veterans leaving the service in the next couple of years. You got 16,000 jobs for every single Workshops for Warriors graduate, yeah. But we can only put through about 200 people a year. Yeah. And funding is our only constraint. And yet I'd say our top 5 companies that grab our students are Tesla, SpaceX, yeah. Reliance Steel and Aluminum, Boeing, Ford, right? And these are great American companies, but we need more. We need to create that investor pool that helps expand, because like you said, you're only a couple $1 million away from success, right?
And I think investing is absolutely key. And again, H, I think it's not just, what would be great for you is to not just have the Teslas, but to have their tier 1 suppliers and tier 2 suppliers, because they need the same, they need the same caliber of people.
Right.
And there's a huge supply chain. I would be similar to Boeing, but for every job we had, there were 8 in the supply chain. So there was an 8-to-1 multiplier, and we spent a lot of time investing in our suppliers and training their people. So there's a tremendous knock-on effect that goes with this as well.
I remember reading your book that in GE you had kind of like a back office. And you realize that this back office that did the accounting, the invoicing, all that stuff is something that every one of your GE business units needed. But by farming all these operations to a kind of a consolidated unit, and SAIC used to do this as well. Ed Murphy and Dick Eager were the ones that were telling me this, that they would basically allocate costs of this one entity to whoever was using it. I think that America needs to do something similar to that for training, because there's so many different companies out here that need training, that need welders or machinists or computer-aided designers or 3D printers, but they can't afford that training, but they all need that result. How do we get that school built and enlarged, because it costs a lot of money to have multi-million-dollar lasers and water jets and CNC mills. And the few companies that do that, like Haas Automation, right? They're probably the #1 computer numerically controlled company in the world that puts equipment into the high schools, colleges, universities, vocational training centers. And they do that because they're an American company and they believe in American kind of dominance and relevance. How do you get other companies to help support this endeavor? What would you do? Who would be your top 3 people?
Look, I mean, I think there's a way to network, believe it or not. There's new kind of what I would call digital manufacturing companies,
right,
that are looking to roll up, excess capacity and manufacturing capability and do it using software and, of course, physical space. I think number 2 is some element of this is still going to be done state by state. And so accessing some of the small business funding for training inside a state or inside a community, I think that's important. And then I just go back to you've got to get on the big waves of the future, which are going to be clean tech, advanced manufacturing, and those capabilities. And so I think nobody can argue that we're going to need more highly skilled workforce in the future than we've had in the past. And training at scale is much more effective than training kind of one company at a time. So.
I want to share something with you that happens often. So we have about 200 tours a year here at workshops, probably because we're in San Diego and next to the world's largest military base.
In January, right? Yeah, yeah.
A lot of people from Minnesota. I don't understand why, but and we get a lot of people that come in that will say, you know what, it costs us $80,000 to train a welder, and we're lucky if we keep 1 out of every 10 that we train. And we'll say, oh, sounds like a lot of money. It costs us $25,000 to train someone through Workshops for Warriors and put them through a 4-month program, 5 days a week, 9 hours a day. And they leave as certified welders, certified through the American Welding Society. We'll say 80,000 seems like a lot more than 25,000, right? You should fund our school. And they go, yeah, you know what? And then they'll come up with some reason because of corporate inertia, because they're not used to it. How long will it take before
Look, what's the next big capacity increment cost you to get? You're saying 200. How do you go from 200 to 2,000?
200 to 600 at graduate years, about $10 million.
Yeah, I mean,
200 to 2,000 is 148 million.
Yeah, so I mean, so start with 200 to 600, you could place them all, you think, right?
Absolutely. Well, we've had 95% placement since 2008. So yes.
10 million. I mean, there's got to be people out there. You and I spoke before about some of the people that I would go to, but that's a good place to start. I think if you can prove it at 600, then you can prove it at 2,000, and you slowly grow. But look, I think the need for training is vast, and look, I do a lot of personal investing now in what's called additive manufacturing. I'm a huge believer that that's going to be a big part of the future. It requires an operator to have a good sense for material science, a good sense for physics, and a good sense for electronics. But once you get all those things, you can really make lots of high-paid, high-caliber jobs.
I agree. We teach 3D printing at Workshops for Warriors, and we're fortunate to have the best 3D printers in the world, from Stratasys and Renishaw. And the next iteration of that are like the Mazak machining centers that do hybrid. So they do additive and subtrative. So they'll add material, they'll remove material, add some more. I agree with you. That's going to be the next iteration for how to move America forward. And training people on how to do that is going to be a combination between structural engineering, machining, regular engineering, and then artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you can embed sensors into there and predict failure rates, you can bolster certain parts, you can reduce mass on others, and then that's going to really push the aerospace sector up, and companies like SpaceX will profit, because that's my goal, right? Marines on Mars, so go Elon, right? We need to help. Like you would say, why don't you vote? Why don't you root for me? Right? When you were here in the States, you'd say, hey, other nations, right? Japan, Japan has FANUC and they vote for, and they root for FANUC. And Germany, everyone roots for DNG or Siemens. We need to vote, we need to root for GE. We need to root for SpaceX. We need to root for Tesla. These are big moonshots, right? Putting, making humanity an interplanetary species is huge. I mean, who else has had that vision in the last 10,000 years? Americans should get behind that. And this is one of those ways to move forward, right?
Yep. Yep. No,
so
great.
I really, really appreciate the time that you spent with me today, and your book itself has been great. And I keep thinking of how your book applies to more government and more America writ large than GE.
I think it's it's really a book about, I'd say, crisis leadership and persistence. H, in terms of when things don't work, keep going. When it's not happening the way you want it to, keep trying. And I think there, we're at a moment in time in our country when we need to kind of get, momentum and in terms, not just, it's not that people aren't doing well, but not enough people are doing well. And so I think it's just kind of, we've got to try some new things and stay persistent.
You mentioned earlier about the New Deal. I'm a big fan of the New Deal 2.0. I'm hopeful that President Biden will come up with something that really captures America's vision and her ability to imagine and dream and create infrastructures to support artificial intelligence, electrical power distribution, the integration of nuclear, gas, coal, solar, battery, and other technologies so that we can kind of wean ourselves away from kind of more destructive energy systems and more onto sustainable energy systems. Telecommunications backbones. This is a perfect opportunity to get all these disparate groups aligned, create highways that incorporate fast charging, that allow for conduits for high-speed communication, and training people. I call it the electrification project. You have all these big, heavy industrial vehicles, cranes, forklifts, fork trucks. We could electrify them, put a Tesla battery pack and motor on a bridge crane that's used on the shipyard, right? It's not going to run away. It's just running on 1 mile of tracks every day. We could reduce our global carbon footprint. We could increase.
That's going to happen.
Right?
I think the electric vehicle trend, it's with us.
Really.
Oh, yes. It's going to happen over the next 10 or 20 or 30 years, but it's happening. I think, H, if you look at what happened in Texas with the freeze, that really demonstrated how weak the electricity grid is across the country. So there's going to have to be billions, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars put into new electricity grids to accommodate renewables and fossil fuels. So there's some big spaces that when you think about, the people that you're training for that are, let's say, coming out of the military today, there's going to be a couple of huge industries that are going to be open to them when you look at the future that are going to be, big, not existing today. They're going to be huge in the future.
I agree, especially digital manufacturing, like you said before. The ability to have manufacturing done in a digital thread to be able to make a solid model or a virtual model of an item and stress test it before you even build it would be huge.
Ship it anywhere.
And then predictive analysis. Understanding where it fails and stop that. And one of the things one of the patents that I'm working on with Fish is something called distributed manufacturing. Be able to create something, keep that file on hand, and then print it out or manufacturing it at distributed locations throughout the world. So you reduce carbon footprint, reduce waste, and from a military guy, right, you create centers that are more resilient. So if one goes down, you have many others, and you're almost like in a ship where you have distributed damage control, you have distributed manufacturing, so you can maintain your autonomy as a nation.
Think about the supply chain that the military has around aviation or the Navy. If you could print spare parts in a Navy yard instead of calling the manufacturer and waiting 2 weeks until the part can get there, it's a whole new game, right? And that technology is out there today. You don't have to wait for it.
Well, we just have to assume some risk. So tell the FAA that, right? We have to assume some risk if we want to be creative. And
technology is always ahead of the regulators, but I think if we keep knocking on the door, people are going to see the benefits are really in the best interest of not just companies, but all of society. And that's gonna be helpful.
Well, I think that we need to send it to Jim to see if there's any questions for us, Jeff, if you don't mind. Jim, what do you think?
Yep, we do. We have a couple of questions teed up. But just before we go into these, I just want to remind everybody out there that we're going to be sending copies of this book. We are believers in the lessons that are presented here, and we want everybody else to be believers as well. So those who are participating in this event today are going to get a copy of Jeff's book, and a great work that it is.
Great.
A couple of let me start with what to me anyway is a fairly technical question. Even though I'm an econ major, I'm not a finance major. So let me put this one out, and this is for Jeff. So in this period of very low interest rates over the last several years, do you think companies are using debt for over-investing in stock buybacks, short-term EPS boost, and under-investing in their longer-term future? If so, how can that be changed?
Yeah, so I think that's a very fair question, particularly in this time when you have really low interest rates. So I guess what I would point to is if you think about the companies that are on, everybody's mind today, and by that I mean kind of Amazon and Tesla and some of the innovative companies of the future. They're not doing stock buybacks, right? They're investing in new technologies, new services, and new things that can continue to drive growth. So, it's always a challenge when you're CEO to figure out what the best capital allocation is. But I think there's very little that can replace just fundamental investment in the future. Going back to the best business that I ran when I was at GE was our aviation business. And this was a big bet, long cycle, billions of dollars invested over 10, 20, 30 years. And that's how you build competitive advantage. And that's how you build the future. So I sit now in Silicon Valley, look, somebody could tomorrow launch an all-electric aircraft. They could do it with billions of dollars. And everybody who's in the industry today would be sitting there saying, what the heck just happened to us? So I just think there's a lot of innovation out there and people are going to get the capital. So you better be paranoid.
I agree.
So another question that came in, and I'll kind of paraphrase on this one, but I think it dovetails well with the response that you just gave. When you're looking at those long-term investments, you have to have a long-term resilient supply chain to support those kind of activities. How can we make our U.S. supply chain more resilient without overly sacrificing profitability?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, one of the conversations H and I had about the pandemic is that the pandemic showed that in globalization, the risks are higher than we thought and the benefits are lower, right? Mm-hmm. So if you made stuff, if you outsourced things just for low wages, you found out in the pandemic that didn't work so well. And those people that had supply chains close to home were ones that really did the best over this cycle. I would urge everybody that's listening today or everybody that's online, go back and really review your cost structure. Go back and really review how much it would cost you to make it yourself versus outsourcing, and how much it would cost you to outsource close to home versus far away. And I would give you 90% chance that the costs have changed versus the last time you did the analysis, and that proximity is a lot more economic than you thought it was maybe 5 or 10 or 15 years ago when you made that decision. So technology is changing economics, and resiliency really matters more now than ever before.
Right. Thanks.
Quick question. One quick question, Jeff, on that. You said bringing things back, even if it were the same cost or maybe even a little bit more expensive, there's got to be some type of delta or some type of pain point that we are willing to pay to bring innovation back to America, right? Because it's very easy to outsource certain things, but it's pretty nebulous to figure out or quantify what do you gain by bringing things back in, so that you have, like you did with your GE managers, right? So you have this cross-pollination of the different people in your team, and they say, oh, you know what? You're sending this to over here. If we do this, it can improve this sector, or make this better, or make this easier to manufacture. At what point do you say, you know what, it's going to cost a little bit more, but we can innovate faster, or we can innovate in minutes and not months?
I'd give you a different spin. I think today,
Mhm.
most manufacturing needs to follow where your markets are.
Okay.
So if I go back in time, let's say in the 90s, I could make something anywhere and I could sell it anywhere, and they didn't have to be connected. I think today, whether you're in the US or Europe or China or India, you want to make things close to where you sell them, even industrial products. And so the ability to do distributed manufacturing, to be more nimble, is really critical today. And there may be a couple businesses that's, maybe semiconductors are different than that, but most assembled products are better off closer to the markets.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I'm sorry, Jim.
Oh, it's another question here, and this is kind of taking a different turn, but looking at operational excellence. Jeff, your predecessor, Jack Welch, was a huge fan of Six Sigma. What are your thoughts on how that concept applies in today's agile environment, and in particular, how it applies to social impact groups like Workshops for Warriors in particular?
Yeah, look, I'd say I was a big fan of lean and cycle time reduction. So that was what I tended to drive. I think process tools, they tend to become an end in and of themselves versus a means to an end. And so my fear was the years that we spent focused on Six Sigma took attention away from innovation. And that's a bad trade, right? Doing less innovative things more smoothly versus doing more innovative things in a more discontinuous way. I take more innovation every day. I think when it comes time to kind of your Workshop for Warriors, teaching your students, kind of fundamental lean tools about how to drive process excellence and accountability, that's a great thing, right? I would focus on that, but I would make sure you always keep the end in mind, because I think people can get lost in process sometimes.
The Marine Corps is one of the best training centers in the world for that. And they have a little chart, it has a little rat going through this maze, and it has a regular rat going through the maze, and it has a Marine that goes from start to end. Improvise, adapt, overcome, and they literally tunnel through obstacles. And that's one of the mantras that we have here: is get to the end quickly, ethically, and safely.
Never forget the goal. That's most good processes will lead you to a good goal, but sometimes people get lost in process, and that's not good either.
I agree.
Just speaking of, that brings to mind. So, not wanting to become a slave to the process or make the process not be an end of itself. I would say that the way government does resource allocation, specifically the Department of Defense with the planning, programming, and budget system, is very process oriented. It takes a long time. And I did this for a number of years in the Marine Corps. One of the largest differences that I saw between working in the Marine Corps and doing some similar things in the civilian industry, I did a year working at Amgen as a corporate fellow. And it appeared to me anyway that the decision making and resource allocation was much more agile. What are your views on that, and what do we have to do in the civilian sector to ensure we don't get bogged down in process?
First I would say, guys, that most American citizens have no idea how much the DoD and DARPA and organizations like that have really developed in terms of the lifestyle we enjoy today. But Jim, when I started in 1982, let's pick a big subject like, again, I hate to go to jet engines, but jet engines. In 1982, the military-led innovation, and that went over to the commercial engines, and that's how it worked. Military first, commercial second. By the time I retired, it was vice versa, right? There was more innovation on the commercial side because they just moved more quickly, right? They experimented more, again, going back to Boeing, Alan Mulally said, I'm going to be able to fly a plane from Sydney to New York City nonstop. So in order to do that, it's got to be 25% more fuel efficient. So engine suppliers, fuselage suppliers, everybody else, you've got to get on board to go do this. So I think the military still is the best way to experiment, but we just need to drive cycle times. You know, Jim, we've got to get the cycle times down. And I think if we can match the experimentation with cycle time, the way Elon Musk does it, that would be a real public-private partnership.
And maybe socializing risk, if we can, like Elon Musk, right? One of the rockets blew up and he goes, great, that's exactly, I got the data that I needed. It blew up, but who cares? I got the data that I needed. And he gets
I was on a panel one time when Senator McCain was alive, the McCain Institute in Arizona. I was the speaker on a panel with Elon. There was just the two of us. And this was, I think, 2014 or 15. And Elon was talking about kind of the military procurement process for rockets. And it was like, I wasn't really aware of any of the stuff, but you know, there were probably a half dozen or 10 senators in the room. And you know, he was very compelling, right? Because his point was, look, I'm going to cut your cost by 50% on the rockets the military is producing, because you've allowed your supply chain to get kind of fat and lazy. And I think that's, unfortunately, Jim, the way, you know, kind of the cost plus mindset and all that has just driven, you know, not enough risk and not enough accountability, quite honestly, for, you know, good execution.
Well, there's accountability, but you know, the Navy had something for a while that was this zero fault mentality, which anybody made a mistake and they were gone. Yeah. And the challenge with that is that it created a risk-averse culture. And secondly, when you make a mistake, you tend to be more cautious the next time and you learn from your mistakes. But if you're removed from that position of leadership, you don't have that opportunity, and then someone else has to go through that whole learning curve again. So we need to be able to absorb the fact that some people are going to fail a couple of times, as long as it's still trending in that right direction, right?
Yep.
So I think we have probably have time for one last question here. We're bumping up against the end of the program, and this is for Jeff. In a previous discussion at the Harvard Business School, you talked about companies that were not prepared for 9/11 attacks or the Lehman Brothers collapse, and we are now fighting through a pandemic. Is there another catastrophic event that companies should be prepared for? Cyber, weather, et cetera. And what core capabilities in any organization should be preserved? Resiliency, agility, decentralization, et cetera.
It's a great, you know, it's a really super question, because it's hard to predict these tail risk events. I'd say if there's any one that every company needs to be aware of that's kind of a discontinuous risk, it's cyber. I used to chair the cyber task force at GE, and it's mind-blowing what's going on that's bad out there that you need to be aware of. So first of all, I would say for any business leader of a company, large or small, out there, you've got to have a cyber kind of approach and strategy, because bad things are going to happen, and you have to be as prepared for that as you can. I think second to that, it's a strong balance sheet and a culture that is adaptable, because you know, you're not going to predict, you know, nobody predicted 9/11. Very few people predicted the financial crisis, and really almost nobody predicted COVID, right? So who was able to persevere? People that had enough cash, people that had a culture that was into solving problems and not pointing fingers, and people that kept a flexible point of view and said, okay, this door is closed, let's open up this door and move in that way. And I think as long as you could do that, you could persevere. In the let's say the 6 to 9 months after the financial crisis, after Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, we made 10 or 11 separate decisions that generated $80 billion in cash to keep us safe. We weren't ready for any of that the day they went bankrupt, but you know, that's what good teams do. So Jim, it's a great question. You know, I'd say be ready for cyber, be as strong financially as you can, but have a culture that's adaptable and flexible and works well together.
Well, I would tell you that in a shameless plug for my Marine Corps, there's not an organization out there that produces a more flexible and adaptable individual and purpose-driven than the Marine Corps.
No, the military is The military is great. I always say, you know, Jim, my favorite philosopher is Mike Tyson, who says everybody has a strategy until they get punched in the nose.
Right.
And you're going to get punched in the nose.
Mhm.
So you better be ready for what comes next.
All right. H, we'll turn it back over to you to close out.
Great.
Well, thank you. First of all, you know, the more I think about what you said in your book, I keep thinking about World War I, World War II, and how the future of war is changing. And it used to be more kind of visceral, driven by bombs and bullets or occupying a nation, and it's very physical. Now I think it's more economic, cyber, IP driven, and we need to pivot to that to be able to defend ourselves, to be able to lead by innovation, and do so from a position of strength and not of weakness. To do that, or until America catches up, I think Workshops for Warriors is going to be creating that vanguard of instructors and of advanced manufacturing technicians and trainers until the rest of America catches up. And that's my goal, that 100 years from now, people are going to look back and they're going to see that Workshops for Warriors was the birthplace for America's green manufacturing renaissance. And I'm hoping now that you're retired and you're able to look back and see all the things that you've done, and I'm hoping that your book will be a clarion call for other Americans to wake up, to put their shoulder to the wheel, and to help rebuild our nation's manufacturing pipeline, to help give every veteran an opportunity, and to give America the workforce that she deserves. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Great.
And go to wfw.org and help us with our mission. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, H. Thanks, everybody. Great to be with you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Bye-bye. Thanks.